It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm here with my friend and contributor, Lauren. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited for this episode because I've wanted to talk about these two movies for a while. Our last episode, we discussed The Birdcage and In and Out, and I talked a lot about what it was like being in high school when that movie came out. I was still in high school when these two films came out, and they came out one right after another. And I sort of developed this theory that in the 90s, there was this series of movies that it felt like The Birdcage and In and Out in particular, like Hollywood was like slowly starting to tell queer stories, and queer people were becoming slowly but surely more visible. And they were still played by straight actors, as in Paul Rudd and Tim Daly and Kevin Kline and Robin Williams.
Right.
But as the 90s went on, there's this sort of, and these two movies kind of represent the introduction of like what is now known as like the gay best friend.
Yep.
Like these two movies are romanticizing like the gay best friend trope. Right. And I don't want to say they were the first because I haven't done that kind of research. I don't know if that's true, but they were the first ones that I saw for sure.
Yeah, these movies, like, what's interesting is not only did I see both of these movies in the theater, and I can remember both of these, like, vividly, like, the nights I saw them in the theater, like, what theater I saw them at. These kind of bookended my senior year of high school. My best friend's wedding came out the summer before my senior year. Object of My Affection, I saw, like, kind of a few weeks probably before I graduated. And, like, you and I are both from, like, small town Illinois, like, and I hung out with a lot of people who, in retrospect, and just knowing now, like, a lot of us are not straight, but, like, that was not a conversation we were having then. We were also in Catholic school. So, like, this is probably my first exposure to the gay best friend trope, and also just, like, yeah, queer people in mainstream movies. I think the only other really queer film I remember seeing when I was this age was Heavenly Creatures, and that was on video, and that was like the one we all pretended to be like so weirded out by, even though at least two of us were like, we are actually not weirded out by this. We are very intrigued by this, but we can't say it. So yeah, like it was an introduction of sorts for me as well, both of these movies.
And I kind of too feel like, so I did do a little bit of research, and I noticed that the book that The Object of My Affection is based on came out in the 80s. So
I actually will say though that I wasn't sure about when the book came out. So thank you for answering my question. The book was adapted for the screen, however, by Wendy Wasserstein, who, when I was in college, so only a few years after I saw Object of My Affection, became one of my very favorite playwrights. She has sadly passed away. She died fairly young. And there's an Easter egg in the movie that when George talks about the first person he slept with, Lucy Jane, that is the name of her daughter. And Wendy Wasserstein also had written about kind of the gay best friend in kind of her first big play, The Heidi Chronicles. Like there was a storyline with the main character and her gay best friend, who I think like, it's been a long time since I read it, but I think like she kind of struggled with like feelings for him as well. And Wendy Wasserstein also had her baby like on her own. The father was, if the father's name was ever made public or anything like that, but like she had Lucy Jane on her own. And I believe in the Heidi Chronicles, like Heidi has a baby on her own. So
okay.
I found that interesting because I didn't know any of this when I first saw the movie, of course, but I also think it's interesting how, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, but what I really noticed is like The Object of My Affection is written like a play almost. I was like, it's a lot of two-person scenes or scenes with only a few characters. There's a lot of very long conversations, which you don't see in a ton of movies. And just there's not a lot of like there's like a montage and like there is some cinematic stuff, but I'm like, there are some very like, especially the scene where Vince has shown up with Deli, like the relatives come in, there's tension between Nina and George, and it's all happening at once. I'm like, this is written by a playwright. Like, this is a play scene. And I thought that was interesting as well. And that's definitely something I noticed watching it now that, you know, went right over my head as a 17-year-old.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. I didn't realize that. But of course, I don't see nearly as many theater productions as you do. So my brain doesn't process things like that. But what I was saying though was how I'm like you, we're the same age. These two films bookended my senior year as well. And one of the things that's interesting about it, although the book came out in the 80s, I remember feeling like at the time, as a very closeted 17-year-old, like this movie got greenlit because of the success of My Best Friend's Wedding and the laziest reading of that ending of My Best Friend's Wedding. It's possible because I remember when it came out, when I was in high school, the girls were like, oh, she hooks up with the gay guy at the end. Like she gets with the gay guy, and everybody just kind of assumed that.
What?
Exactly. To the point, like, and so much so I saw it in the theater. And that was kind of the narrative around it. And I didn't see it again for like 10 years. And so that narrative had kind of, in my mind, I was like, oh, that was the ending of the movie. So that when I rewatched it, not this time, I've seen it several times, but when I watched it, so probably in 2005, 2006-ish, I was like, wait a minute. They don't get together at the end. Like, what?
My mouth is hanging open right now.
It was... small town, like I said, everybody that saw it, like people were like had opinions on whether she should have or not, but to them it was very much.
Okay, I'm gonna give my small town redneck ass some credit, because even at 17, I did not read the ending of it that way at all.
I don't remember if I read it that way when I saw it, or if it became, like I said, it became the narrative, and I didn't see it again for a very, very long time.
Sure.
Like I said, it was probably about 2005, 2006. So 7 years or so.
Okay.
And it's just, like I said, when I got to the ending, it was like, oh.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And I do think it is the laziest reading of that ending. Like, that's stupid.
Funny.
It's stupid.
Funny. Yeah, that's because that is never how I read it, ever. Or
because you know gay people.
I know gay people, but to be fair, when I was 17, I didn't think I knew gay people. So,
Sure.
Even as a teenager, I did not read it that way. That is very interesting. I had never heard anyone reading it that way. But yeah, it is interesting, like, rewatching these movies, like, as an adult who not only knows gay people, but like, that is my world. Like, right. I don't know a lot of straight people. I know my family. I know my coworkers. Like, that's about it.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't have a ton of straight friends.
I don't have a ton of straight friends. Yeah. And it's just, it is interesting, like, rewatching these movies from that perspective. Also, I think maybe I liked Object of My Affection more than you did, because, like, I think a lot of women do, I think sometimes women do develop, like, romantic feelings for their gay best friend. And I am one of those women. To be fair, I was much younger than those characters. I was, like, 20. And, like, you don't know shit when you're 20. And also, like, I don't know. It's just, I sometimes wonder if, like, women falling for their gay best friends, number one, I wonder if, like, that's a thing that still happens. Again, I don't know from, like, the world I'm in now, but also I do wonder how many women who have done that in the past, like, were actually not straight themselves, and in some cases they were connecting like on a deeper level and just didn't realize it yet. I don't think that's the case in Object of My Affection, and I don't think that's the case for everyone who's done that. Is that still a thing? Like, do straight women fall for gay men? Like, I don't know.
Probably.
Probably?
Yeah. Well, and it bears mentioning, we are talking about these two movies and the gay best friend trope, and we barely even discussed like the plots of these movies or anything, but there was another movie that Rupert Everett, who was in this film, made with Madonna about...
And it had the word best in it.
What's that?
It had the word best in the title. The next
sure
best
did.
thing.
The next best thing. I have not seen it.
Me neither.
And when looking into it for this podcast, it's not really in print anymore. It's not on DVD. It's sort of lost to the ether, which from my understanding is fine because it was a terrible movie.
That is what I heard. And was it terrible or was it reviewed by a lot of straight white men? But I have heard it's terrible.
I think it's probably both. It was... And again, this is not the film that we have decided to talk about, but it was directed by John Schlesinger, who did Midnight Cowboy.
Interesting.
And I can't figure out how anyone thought John Schlesinger, who was a very good filmmaker and who made very good films, should make a romantic comedy starring Madonna, who's not a very good actress, and Rupert Everett, who's wonderful, but
Madonna is very limited in that, like, League of Their Own, she's amazing.
Yeah.
But she's kind of playing, A, she's not the lead, and B, she's kind of playing, like, a version of, I don't know about herself, because I don't know her, but a version of, like, kind of a persona she's had over the years.
Yeah.
But, like, whether Madonna can carry a non-musical film, a lot
about it just doesn't make sense to me. But luckily, it's out of print, and we don't have to watch it for this podcast. But if you have a copy and want to send it to me, I will watch it and review it if you're listening.
Please
because
do.
Why not? Like, why not? Yeah. Well, and John Schlesinger was gay. So...
Oh, that's weird. This is so weird. Like, now I'm very intrigued. And yes, if you are listening and you have a DVD, please send it to Brian and he can watch it and review it. And then he can, like, no contact, like, deliver it to me. And I can watch it and review it.
Absolutely. Let's make that happen. In the meantime, though, we're talking about, I don't even know if I've said the names of the movies.
I don't know if you did.
However, I don't, you're clicking on the link, it's the title, so we're talking about My Best Friend's Wedding, and The Object of My Affection, My Best Friend's Wedding, starring Julia Roberts. I remember at the time this was sort of her return to romantic comedy, because she'd had a couple of duds box office wise.
Yep.
And so she says, she comes back and she's like, I'm America's sweetheart, but I'm playing an absolute monster of a person.
Monster disaster of a person who, to be fair, gets her comeuppance. Like, she doesn't achieve her goal, and like she gets called out on the massive amounts of shit she drops on, like, this poor unassuming, like, family who are very generous. And it's interesting watching it because she's a really terrible human.
Yeah, but you're on her side for at least the first, like,
you are
third of the movie, because it's Julia Roberts.
Because it's the magic of Julia Roberts, and, like, no one else could have played that part, and, like, had you with her for that long. Yeah.
And it kind of does, well, I think a lot of that too is even just based on the marketing, because you get the sense, like, in the commercials and the trailers and the poster too, that it's just going to be about her, like, getting her man back, and like, the man is rightfully hers. And, you watch the movie and that's not quite the case, even though she very much thinks it is.
Right.
Even, I like the fact that her gay best friend, George, was like, the one person that was like, no, you have to tell him that you can't do this, the voice of reason.
Amazing. Like, I adore George. Like, he is British. He is cosmopolitan. He has fascinating sounding dinner parties where everyone's smoking at the table, which is gross. But like, he's at a reading with like this guy played by Harry Shearer.
Oh yeah.
Like, but he's really wonderful, and he has this awesome life, and he is her voice of reason. And like, yeah, he's the one person saying, like, first he's kind of like, okay, if you are feeling this way, you have to talk to it. You have to talk to this guy that you had a fling with in college, who became your best friend, who you both said, like, you're going to get married if you're still single at like 28, which I don't know if that was ever a real thing people did, but it doesn't seem to be something that's even in pop culture anymore. And for that, I am grateful. But anyway, and yeah, he's the one who's like, first of all, just fucking talk to him. Like, tell him how you're feeling. And then second of all, it was like, what the hell are you doing? Trying to sabotage his wedding to like this perfectly nice woman who like, he seems to genuinely love and care for. And he's like, yeah, what the fuck? Like, what are you doing? And yeah, he is the ideal gay best friend. He's
like the mold from which they are all
exactly.
formed.
He is the BMW of the GBF.
Yeah, well, he's Rupert Everett too. So I mean,
Rupert Everett, who's wonderful and who was out. Like, yeah. I don't think he was ever in. Like, I think he was an out gay man. Like, and just has this beautiful British accent, and you just fall in love with George, like in a gay best friend way. Like, you fall in love with him. He's
and I love the way that when he shows up, because she's lied and she's like, oh, this is my fiance, and it basically has a like, fuck you. He's like as obnoxious as possible.
Oh my god!
But also because he's British and Rupert Everett, it's super charming.
Oh yeah,
like, you're being obnoxious, but I love it.
Right, he gets everyone singing Dionne Warwick in the restaurant in the movie's most iconic scene that everyone remembers, and yeah, it just works because he's Rupert Everett and he's just wonderful. And how can you not fall in love with him? Like,
definitely,
he's the MVP.
That's why so many rural straight women thought that was the ending.
That's true.
Where it was A, they had never met a gay man, so it didn't occur to them that gay men don't just go back and forth. Right. And B, they had just spent the movie like completely being charmed by Rupert Everett. So why wouldn't they think like, oh, what a great couple?
Yeah, there's like some crazy projection going on there. Yeah. Like, did you know that the original ending for the movie was different?
I did, yes.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Sure. What was the original ending?
The original ending is she was just going to be like dancing with a random guy who was played by John Corbett, who later became Aiden on Sex and the City, which is very funny when you think about that. Like, he would later become like the dream man, like the dream straight man to straight women. But it didn't test well with audiences because I think they wanted more George. So So George shows up and ends up dancing with her. But again, that is so weird that you knew people who thought they ended up together, because it's just, no, he's gay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It blows my mind as well. But yeah, and it's quite the cast.
Such a good cast.
Dermot Mulroney, Cameron Diaz, Rachel Griffiths, later from 6 Feet Under. And it bears mentioning, if I didn't mention this on my podcast, the opening song is performed by Ani DeFranco. Yeah. It is a cover of Wishin' and Hopin', Burt Bacharach, of course.
Yes.
And it's wonderful. And
it's really good.
I love her to death. It's completely like, I remember at the time it pissing so many people off because it's all about like how to keep your man. But like, first of all, it's a classic song.
Oh yeah.
And it's completely against her persona.
Right. And so, that's what I thought. That's so interesting that like it's Ani DeFranco covering it.
Yeah. I just think it's cute and fun. Like, it's a cute, fun cover. Like, I'm not offended by it.
Does it really well. Like,
yeah.
she embraces it and like does it. And yeah, Cameron Diaz in this movie, just like, I remember I had seen her in The Mask, and like I remembered her from that because she was so beautiful. Like,
was this like her big follow-up to The Mask?
This was her big follow-up. Yeah.
Okay.
The Mask was like 94 or 95. I remember it was my early high school years. And I remember like this really beautiful woman, like, which the fact that I really remembered this really beautiful woman should have told me something at age 14 or 15, but you know, counts. Right. But I remember just this movie, it was like, oh my God, she's completely wonderful and like sweet and funny and charismatic. And like, you understood why Dermot Mulroney's character, whose name I am blanking on, you understand why he fell completely in love with her, because she's so completely lovable. And like, it also like sort of emphasizes what an absolute shitbag Julianne, played by Julia Roberts, is, because it's like, oh my God, like you're trying to hurt this like lovely person. But yeah, Cameron Diaz, man, so good.
She's great in this movie. It's too bad that she's retired and isn't just not making movies anymore. She's really wonderful. I was never a fan of her in more serious roles. I don't think that she quite has the range.
I think she was very funny, like in a way that a lot of people aren't. And I don't think that quite translated to serious roles, but like, I don't know if you've seen The Sweetest Thing.
I have.
Like, she's so good in it. Like, she's just so funny. And like, you know, I think she retired from acting because she kind of wanted to and she was kind of over it, which I love. Cameron, live your life. But it's just like, I wish we could have gotten more of her being funny, because she's so good in those roles. Yeah, absolutely.
Dermot Mulroney was Michael, by the way, which is why we couldn't remember his name, because it was such a boring name.
Because it's a boring name.
But he's also
kind of a boring human.
I mean, he's a very, very bland looking individual.
He really is.
I remember him most from Young Guns, which I had on VHS before this movie came out.
I don't remember that movie.
I don't think I've ever seen it. It's very like 80s Western, but
got it.
I was into it when I was a 10-year-old, so I have a
I wonder why.
I know, right? Yeah, but like I was saying, it's really, I find it so fascinating that both of these films take that gay best friend trope and also kind of, in a weird way, kind of make gay men into like romantic leads for straight women.
Yeah.
Where we're expected to, and you know, like we said, like, you know, you spend the movie falling in love with Rupert Everett's character, and like, and so it sounds so stupid because it feels like, how stupid could you be? But when you think about it that way, you can see how people might have read that way, because like I said, they had spent the movie.
Totally.
And so they're looking at Rupert Everett as a romantic lead.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he's so much more interesting than Michael, who's super boring. Like, to the point where you're just like, and I think also like George, Rupert Everett's character, brings up like, Jules, is this about Michael or is this about winning? I think like, I may be paraphrasing that, but it's just, it really is, because it honestly, first of all, voice of reason. Second of all, Michael's really boring. So like, let Kimmy have him, because clearly like she adores him, like from a very genuine place. And it's just, no, George is where it's at. And I do think it's interesting how like a few years after these movies came out, like Will and Grace came on the scene. And that was, you know, ultimate gay best friend. Yeah,
definitely. I think that in a lot of ways, these films set that tone for it. And it's that same kind of thing where they're Hollywood trying to make gay men into romantic love interests. There's almost a precedent for it if you go back to the 50s and you look at like Rock Hudson and gay men who were in leading roles.
Oh yeah. Like, and it's just like with Rock Hudson, you had like, he wasn't out, but he was, you know, he was suave and he was cool and fun, and like he and Doris Day had like this, you know, this banter and this like back and forth that was very sexual but not. And I think that's what's interesting with both of these movies we're talking about too, where like there's an element of safety with that, right? Because it's like, you know, you get like all the fun, like sort of a romantic friendship without the like scariness of like sex and the grossness of like straight men, which, you know, they can be very gross. And you know, with a gay, like you're not getting that. So yeah, and I think like especially in My Best Friend's Wedding too, I think safety plays a really big part, where like, you know, these men are like the safe harbor for the leading lady, who in both movies is going through a lot. Whether in My Best Friend's Wedding, it's, you know, her best friend is getting married, to Object of My Affection, where like she is staring down like having a child on her own, which is a very frightening thing, and like just a more genuine like conflict and more like compelling problem than My Best Friend's Wedding. Much as I love it, it's just like, yeah, you didn't have to do all this, you could have just let him get married. But like Object of My Affection, it is like, you know, she's a presumably, I think like 30 something woman who like, you know, is having a baby, because it's just, you know, you can't just have a baby whenever you want to. And it's, you know, she has this like safe haven in this roommate who's become her best friend, who she then says like, do you want to co-parent my child? And so yeah, I think like with queer leading men like to straight women, yeah, there's just the element of this is a safe thing. But I do think it is interesting how like the character written as the gay best friend, yeah, like we said, like becomes almost the leading man. And like there's that, they have that intimacy that she no longer has with Michael, and like she has it now with George. So, and I do think that's really fascinating how like some people interpreted that as she ends up with romantically like this very gay man. And but yeah, I can almost understand that, because it's just like we're all in love with George by the end. We're not in love with Michael, we are in love with George. And I do really love the ending. Like I don't see it as a romantic thing, but it's really lovely and satisfying, because she has accepted that, like, you know, I mean, they've got married, it's done. Like she doesn't get her man, but like she does get like she gets like her safe harbor. She gets her friend who has come back to the wedding to be there for her and like give her a twirl around the dance floor. And it is like a lovely ending. Like
and really, I love the way he's just talking to her like, as though he's not there, and then he slowly starts to like clue her in. I think that's really cute. So good. Like, and I remember being in the theater and we were all like, oh my God, he's there. Like George is there. And he is the ideal gay best friend. Yeah. And it's the idea too, that people who may have read it that way, I feel like they're subscribing to this sort of heteronormative view that she can't possibly have a happy ending if she's not with a man. She has a man. Yeah. And she has to, like, you kind of see this Julia Roberts movie and you don't want to leave the Julia Roberts movie. You don't want to leave until she has a man. Until she hits the man. But you're so right. And yet, and then I'm over here going, I love that, like, the best relationship in this movie, and like the healthiest, honestly, is a friendship, like between a woman and a gay man. And like, but yeah, no, you're right. Like for Julia Roberts, you people want the ending where she's with a man. Like, yeah. So interesting. And they've completely desexualized Rupert Everett to the point where you only know he's gay because they tell you. I mean, he acts flamboyant and stuff, and he's acting like Rupert Everett, but you're right, though. You don't see him with doing anything. You know, it's not like he's not even wearing fingernail polish or anything. Like literally. I know. He's passing. He's the ideal, like, again, like he's the leading man. Like he's not,
yeah, we're not going to show him with another man. No. This is a Julia Roberts movie, and we want people to be in love with George. So, like, he's just very well dressed, but not particularly flamboyant. That is also a good point.
I did not like his, like, 90s haircut, but I blame the era and not
it was the era. Like, even the hottest dudes had bad haircuts in the 90s. Like, I'm not going to hold it against.
It just was, like, flopping a lot when he would move around, and I was like, oh,
that was considered. That's the leading man thing too, though, because that was considered like super dreamy in the 90s. Like, he had the floppy hair.
Oh, weird. I don't think I was ever into that. Well, speaking of leading men, we were also talking about The Object of My Affection, where the perennially ageless Paul Rudd is the leading man to his eventual friend's co-star, Jennifer Aniston.
Paul Rudd just, seems to age in reverse because he just looks. I was watching Clueless over Christmas because it was just on TV, and it was just like, hey, Paul Rudd, looking exactly the same. He's just, I always forget, because if anyone says, like, who's your favorite actor, who's, like, your big crush, like, I never say Paul Rudd. But then I watch Paul Rudd in a movie, and I'm like, God damn. Like, there's a reason he has been around this long. He's so fucking charming. Like, and it's just such this natural charisma that, like, people think that everyone, or, like, you can teach that, or, like, everyone has that. It's like, no. Paul Rudd has that. Paul Rudd is just he's so charming. And it's like, it's just so interesting to watch, because it's like, no, like, I don't know if I call him, like, a movie star, like, in a Cary Grant way or whatever, but it's just like, no, like, he's got it. And
he's especially in the last few years, he's flipped between, like, you know, indie projects and doing prequel, Wet Hot American Summer prequel, just because his friends asked him to, and then doing, like, two of the biggest movies of the last couple of years. Like, he's a superhero, but he's still in, like, indie comedies. And that movie, They Came Together, with Amy Poehler.
Oh God, love it.
And he does stuff like that, and he shows up on Friends, and he's fits in wherever he's at, because he's just that amiable and affable.
And I remember, like, even after Clueless, like, he was in Romeo and Juliet, which he's also one of my favorite movies, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. He's great in As Well As Paris, and he's perfect because he is the perfectly charming dude that she wants nothing to do with, because he does nothing for her. But I remember around this time, too, like, he was doing theater, like, on the West End, like, then he shows up, you know, a few years later in Wet Hot American Summer. And I think he was always just like, I'm not just going to be like the teen dreamboat leading man. Like, I'm going to do what the fuck I want because I'm Paul Rudd and I can. And, like, I love that for him. I love that dream for him.
And he's genuinely funny. And, like,
I forgot how funny he is in this movie. Like, because he's so dry at times and kind of, like, sarcastic. And it's just like, oh, Paul Rudd. Like, I would be in love with you too. Like,
absolutely. So The Object of My Affection, Jennifer, he plays the roommate to Jennifer Aniston, who finds herself knocked up by the best friend from Mad About You.
That's where I've seen him. Thank you.
Yes. And, you know, he's the best friend from Mad About You, and she's, like, not feeling it. She's like, you're just kind of a putz and not into it. And she wants to co-parent with Paul Rudd, and things get out of control.
George, we're talking about, I didn't put that together till last night. I'm like, oh my God, both of the gay men are George.
Yeah. Like, I put that together. Like, that was in my note. I was going to mention that at some point.
So what I did want to talk about is, excellent plot summary, by the way. So what I did want to talk about is, you know, we talked about Rupert Everett, out gay, like, even at the time of this movie. Paul Rudd, straight, that we know of. How do we feel? Because I know, like, this can be a conversation. How do we feel about straight actors playing gay men?
For this movie in this era, it doesn't bother me, because you short of casting Rupert Everett, you don't get this movie made if you cast an openly gay actor.
Exactly.
These days, I for me, I kind of take it like project by project. Like,
Same.
The immediate example that comes to mind is Milk with Sean Penn as Harvey Milk. But then, like, obviously, but it's also a gay filmmaker, gay writer, and all the supporting cast is gay.
Right.
So, like, it's the same thing in that sense where, like, you don't get that movie made if you don't get Sean.
Exactly. Like, they needed...
So, I'm against, Scarlett Johansson playing trans under any circumstance.
And to me, yeah, trans is a different thing with me.
Yeah,
with me, like, gender, and that's a no.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying. Like, I kind of take it project by project. Sometimes I think it's more problematic than others.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think, like, with The L Word, which is one of the series I have talked about and written about, and just because it's one of the few series that has a lot of queer female characters, and like without Jennifer Beals, that probably would not have gotten made. And like, she has also just really embraced like being an ally, and like, she took it from the beginning. Like, she took playing a lesbian very, very seriously. And and I thought of another example too. But yeah, it's just sometimes without that certain actor, like, the project just does not get made. But you also have like other queer cast members, you have queer writers and directors, and like The L Word did a lot with queer directors. So I respect them for that. Also, I think it's at some points, like, I never want to police it, because some actors, like, some of them aren't out for whatever reason. Some of them don't realize, or like don't come out until after they've played. Like, I know a lot of L Word cast members came out like during the show, or like just went public during the show. And it's just like, that's such a personal thing that like, I would never be extreme. Like, you have to be like this out queer person to play like an out queer person. But I agree. I take it project by project. I think, in a lot of cases, when it's done well, the actors just is taking it seriously and like not being like whatever stereotype or whatever. But yeah, especially in this era, like, you needed Robin Williams for the Birdcage. Like, you needed Kevin Kline for In and Out. And Kevin Kline is also like a big theater person and has been from the beginning. And that's why like I love In and Out. But yeah, agreed. I just thought like we should address that, because like, to our knowledge, Paul Rudd is not gay. So yeah.
The other issue I take with that is because if you start to say that like only queer people can play queer characters, then the natural, maybe not natural, but the inclination then is like, well, then gay people can't play straight. And I absolutely think that gay people should be able to play straight.
Absolutely.
Kirsten Stewart is about to play Princess Diana, and that picture, she looks amazing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful actress. Like, she should play whoever she wants to play. Like, yeah.
That said, if like Todd Phillips is directing a romance about a couple of gay people, and he casts like Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto, then I'm like, well, fuck that movie all to hell. But then you've got Supernova, which just came out with Colin Firth and Stanley Tucci playing a queer couple. And I haven't seen it. I've heard great things.
I have too. And Stanley Tucci is like someone I trust to play a queer person. It's like
because he's a theater person.
He's a theater person. And like, what I was thinking of where you need this person to get this made is The Normal Heart. Like Mark Ruffalo. Like, and that was another person who like, I'm okay with this because he's Mark Ruffalo. It's like, he's going to be really serious about that. And that also was, obviously the play, Larry Kramer. And like, there were a lot of queer actors in the cast.
And it was directed by Ryan Murphy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's what I love. Like, that's my favorite thing about Ryan Murphy, even if I don't like all of his projects.
Agreed.
But he gives voice to
agreed
other queer people. And I I think that's wonderful.
Agreed.
So he gets a kind of a pass for like Ratchet.
So like he's very hit or miss with me, but yeah,
For sure.
like he gives voice to queer people and queer actors, and
But to go back to the movie we're talking about, like we were talking about, it's an interesting sort of they sort of romanticize the gay best friend to the point where they take it in this film a lot further. Obviously, they almost have sex, but for a phone call.
That was super interesting to me because I remember like watching that in the theater again as a 17-year-old who didn't know shit about shit. But I was just like, whoa, like, they're going there. Like, what's going to happen? Like, I thought he was gay. And, of course, I'd be remiss not to say that, like, in these 90s movies, like, bisexuality, not a thing. Like, not talked about. I think, honestly, going back to the L word, I think that was the first time I'd ever heard, like, bisexual, like, spoken on, in pop culture. And it was just, like, or like in a TV show or movie, and it was just like, whoa, because like I barely heard people say that word. And so
you still barely hear people say that word. And so in the 90s it was practically like
verboten. And that hookup scene, very, very, very interesting.
But that was one of the, because you talked about it, we've talked about how you liked the movie more than I did. One of my biggest issues with the movie was when that was happening, or when she gets all like crying about how she's like, I just was like, fuck off. Like,
I can see
fuck
that.
off. Like, this isn't about, like, she's projecting so much onto him.
He absolutely is.
He reciprocates that to an extent, but he also like meets that other guy and like tries to be very clearly like, keep this up, but also like, get laid on his own. And then she's like, well, you can't do that. And he's like, well, wait, so you can, but I can't? Like, what?
And I was happy that conversation took place.
Yeah.
Because it was it was coming to that. Like, there was gonna be like a blow up. And like, I was grateful to the movie that like that took place, that she is called out on like, she is really projecting this, like, better. It's like, oh God, y'all did not sit down and talk about like, what is this actually going to look like? Like, eventually, like, someone's going to meet somebody and there's going to be a wrench thrown into this, and how do we handle it? That said, it was the 90s and nobody was having these conversations.
Right.
And it was going to come to blows. That said, while I was glad she was called out on her shit, I also think I was like, buddy, while I respect that you have met this person you've really clicked with, you need to get laid, it is absolutely not okay. She's projecting this on you. You also didn't talk to her about meeting somebody. Like, I just kind of think it's like your own like boyfriend now is like, why are we hiding this? And he has the point. Like, because he has made, Paul Rudd George has made this commitment by this point to co-parent her child.
Yeah.
Which, granted, she's not thought that through, but like he hasn't either, to be fair.
Yeah, like they had one conversation about it and
had one. Yeah. And it was just kind of like, okay, so you're both just making all of these assumptions, and then you're at the point where, yes, you've sort of been made to feel like you have to sneak around, but also you're an adult and you could have brought this up to her.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
So you're not totally blameless in this either. Like, you're sneaking around someone, which is also not fair to the person you're sneaking around. Like, and so yeah, I found that interesting. And like, when they finally came to blows, I was like, yeah, this was gonna happen. And I liked that the movie went there, because it was like, no, you're not being fair, but also like, she's someone who's going to have a baby on her own and is trusting you to like co-parent the baby. So you're not really communicating with her either.
Yeah. At first, when you were saying that, I was like, well, does he really owe her that explanation of a boyfriend. But you're right. He did make a commitment to help with the baby. That is definitely a conversation that should have been had much sooner than any of them did. But yeah, one of the other things I wanted to talk about in regards to this movie is less about the movie and more so about Allison Janney and Alan Alda. I
love them so much.
And number one, there's like a 30-year age difference, which is strange.
That's true.
But yeah, but it also like super works for whatever reason.
Super great.
And I love Allison Janney is probably we talked about how George was the voice of reason. Rupert Everett George was the voice of reason for Julia Roberts. Yeah. I kind of think that the voice of reasons for Jennifer Aniston are Allison Janney and Nigel Hawthorne.
Yeah, and they're both. Allison Janney just is, she's the greatest of all time. I want her in everything on my screen. She's wonderful. And this is probably the first thing I ever saw her in. And yeah, she really is, because at one point she says, I enjoy gay men. I just don't like my stepsister being in love with one. And she's the first person who said that. How is this going to work? Why are you sitting around pregnant waiting for him to call you? I mean, just what the hell? And Nigel Hawthorne is absolutely great. He's a gay theater critic, and he is actually, which is really lovely. He has sort of taken in this young actor, and we don't learn anything about this, but I kind of took from the context that maybe the actor had been kicked out by his family, maybe was not close to his family, so this person was family to him, and I was I like that element of queer chosen family too.
When they first showed up, I was like, oh, this is creepy, what's this about?
Oh yeah, and I think we're supposed to see that.
Yeah, but they kind of, it is justified over the course of the movie.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, he's sort of the speech at the Thanksgiving dinner table when the two guys have gone off on a walk, and Nigel Hawthorne says to Nina, Jennifer Aniston's character, you can't pin all your hopes to someone who's not going to return your feelings that way ever, because you're going to end up alone. And I really liked that. I loved his character. He's like we said, he's a theater critic, and he's the older gay man we all want in our lives. He's lovely.
Yeah. Did you think that there was any sort of sadness to his character in the sense that he is sitting alone on Thanksgiving with a woman he barely knows? And granted, he's British, so maybe he doesn't really give a shit about Thanksgiving. I don't know his history with the holiday.
Right.
But he is spending a national holiday with a stranger, giving her advice, drinking her wine or her whatever she was drinking.
And even if he's not close to his family, or he's obviously British and is over here, he doesn't have other friends. That he could have gone to for a Thanksgiving. So I definitely got a sadness from him, which I thought he played so wonderfully. And I really loved how at the end he'd kind of become part of the extended family. He's at her daughter's school performance, and I found that so sweet. I was just she's obviously 5 or 6 by the end, so I'm 5 years have passed, and he's still in their lives. And
yeah, I think he's still in the life of Paul.
Yeah,
they're still friends, and he's with Paul, and so they're all kind of, I can see that. It makes sense.
I also enjoy how in both of these movies, neither of the gay characters experience homophobia, which I was glad to see. There's some low-key stereotyping, when Allison Janney says, I want you to, come over, we're having RuPaul over.
Yeah.
Which cracked me up, but yeah, I liked it, because I feel at this time, the other queer movies, were indie movies where there was usually a lot of homophobia. So it was nice to see that in the mainstream.
Yeah, they don't really, I guess, there's a lot of that stereotyping. The only real moment that would even come close is, and it's not even really based in homophobia, but that guy from Mad About You wants to beat up Paul Rudd.
Oh God, yes.
But that's because he thinks like, you got my girlfriend pregnant,
right.
Which is a different kind of macho posturing than
Exactly.
homophobia, but is still macho posturing.
I will say, like, I appreciated the nuance they gave that character, though, because, like, yeah, I love that you said putz, because that's exactly what he is. But, like, he's not a terrible guy. He's just not right for her, and, like, she knows that.
Yeah.
But, like, he's excited to be a father, which I appreciated. I was like, I like how Wasserstein, or, you know, maybe the author had this in the book too. Like, I liked how they didn't go the route of like, this is a total deadbeat. Like, it's like, he's very excited to be a father. Like, he is involved from day one. And, you know, like, he's there at the end too. And like, she calls him daddy. And like, I liked that, where it's just, I always like when it's like, the person who's not right for them, like, isn't portrayed as this terrible person. Like, right. And this is someone who had faults, threatened to beat him up, like, whatever, had that, like, machismo of, like, being rejected. But then he came around, and he was just like, you know, I want to be involved. And I appreciated that.
Yeah, he's fine.
Oh, I put in caps all the Pepsi product placement because there was a lot of it.
I noticed it like right at the beginning when she was when she was a school counselor and she was talking to her students, and they were all holding a different Pepsi drink. Which, you know, maybe the vending machine is just a Pepsi vending machine.
And then, you know, when he brings over like all the like very delicious looking takeout, like I'm missing New York and Brooklyn hardcore right now. But there was like the big Pepsi bottle, which again, like they were a Pepsi restaurant, obviously, but that just cracked me up.
Yeah.
I was like, this movie is.
You can't like unsee stuff like that. Oh, but we were talking about the filmmaker. We were talking about John Schlesinger doing The Next Best Thing and how that seemed ill-fitted. One of the things, the film that this filmmaker, Nicholas Hentner, had made before this were The Crucible and the Madness of King George.
That's right. I remembered, like, I was like...
With Nigel Hawthorne.
Oh, I remembered hearing that name, like, a fair amount in the 90s. So, like, now that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like he does a good job, along with Wasserstein, of just creating, like, this little, like, capsule of a world. Like, we have Brooklyn, we have Cobble Hill, which is funny because literally the book I had finished reading before I watched this movie was called Cobble Hill. And it is set in Cobble Hill, which, no surprise, is very gentrified now. But, like, this was kind of Brooklyn, like, right on the verge of being gentrified. Like, where like a social worker could still like afford like a cute little Brooklyn apartment. And like, I don't know, it's a very kind of, for me, I felt it was a very charming, like, product of its time, like, little universe, complete with very 90s cast. We have not mentioned Steve Zahn, who, like, I adore Steve Zahn, and Steve Zahn was in everything in the 90s, and he's very Steve Zahn here. He's Paul Rudd's straight brother who keeps cheating on his fiance, who he then marries at the end. Poor woman. But I don't know. Like, I was very charmed by this movie overall. Could it be made today? Fuck no. Like, every conversation we're having is different now, thank God. But I don't know. It was just, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't think this is aged horribly. Like, I'm not super offended by any of it. And I was worried I would be because, you know, queer movies at this time, it's like some of it doesn't hold up. But I don't know. I thought he did a good job creating this, like, cute little gay-ish world that, like, wasn't cutesy. So, I don't know.
I didn't find the movie didn't really work for me at all, honestly. Okay. I can see how it's like, I like what you're saying, like, it's like this bubble of the community, and there, because you see all the same people. For me, it felt, and it doesn't help that you've got Jennifer Aniston and the guy from Mad About You and Alan Alda. Like it's so sitcom-y to me. It's so like it veers wildly between like sincere moments and like this weird sort of comedy that doesn't quite land. And that was why I noticed to mention the director, because it seems to me in the same way that like, how do you get the guy that did Midnight Cowboy to do this romantic comedy? Why do you go to the guy who's done 2 period pieces about an Arthur Miller play? And how do you get him to do the romantic comedy? Like it felt like it needed like a lighter touch.
I thought it did a good job with the light touch. I will say that, and this is pure speculation on my part, a lot of Wendy Wasserstein's plays, I went through a real Wendy Wasserstein phase in college, and I read like everything she's ever done. And I read her biography several years ago, so like I do not remember it. A lot of her plays are essentially like dramedies. So they are more concentrated on the drama with like very kind of funny, like poignant moments. And sometimes I sort of almost wonder if that's more what this movie was supposed to be. Because that would more explain like the director, that would explain like Wendy Wasserstein being brought on, but then it became like a Jennifer Aniston vehicle. So it's like, oh, like we got to make this a Jennifer Aniston vehicle and like really market it as a rom-com, which I do remember that. Like it was very much marketed as like a romantic comedy.
Oh yeah, they're like dancing on the cover of the on the poster or whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And like even though in the trailer like he says like there's the line like Vince, I'm gay. Yeah. And it's just, but it was still marketed as a rom-com. Right. So I don't know. I just kind of wonder like in its original like early stages, like what was this movie going to be?
Right. I would rather read her script than watch this movie again.
I also do wonder if I wrote, one of my notes was I would be interested in a story where an arrangement like this actually worked.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure it has somewhere like
somewhere like where this did work, where like there were ground rules in place and like what is this going to look like after the baby is born, and you know, but I don't know, like that's a story which obviously would not work here because then like there's the conflict and blah blah blah, but yeah, it's just like what would this look like?
Yeah, there's got to be, as I'm sure it's, even if it's never happened successfully, someone's written a story where it happens successfully, right? Like, it's got to be out there somewhere. But yeah, that'd be interesting because just the dynamic of, well, and then you have, I mean, it opens up all kinds of questions. Like, what exactly would that mean? Like, are you talking like a straight woman raising a baby with her gay best friend? Or are you talking about like mixed couples? Like, I have 2 lesbian friends who have 2 children from their gay best friend, and they've had 2 kids. It's been 6 years, so something's working.
I think with queer people too, there is, and I'm about to make a very big broad generalization, I think with queer people too, there is more of like the sort of like the openness to like family can mean different things and it can look very different, whereas when you incorporate straight people into the mix, like you've got a lot of that ingrained like heteropatriarchy going on that like we all do, but you know, so yeah, like
they're just not as used to having it challenged, maybe. exactly
And like like to like, you know, we've all been raised with like family is this one thing, but with queer people it's like but is it? And you know, a lot of straight people just like have never had it challenged.
And that is a topic that comes up quite a bit on this podcast, the queer people and their chosen families.
Absolutely. And that's why like I even loved like just the little snippet of like, you know, Paul Rudd and his like twinky little boy toy who's very cute, and Nigel Hawthorne's character, like just like watching a movie, and I was like, that's a really lovely nod to like the kind of queer like community, like chosen family. You can see why like even though, yeah, obviously, like, he's sleeping with the twink, like, why, like, he's hanging out with the both of them, because I'm like, oh yeah, like, he's getting the community that, like, he's not getting with Nina.
Yeah.
So,
and it's like, through no fault of her own, it's not anything that she can offer him.
Right, exactly. And I think, like, if he had been able to verbalize that, like, in a way that she could understand, like, they might not have had the, like, screaming fight that they had.
Right, yeah.
But again, like, maybe, you know, again, like, these weren't conversations we were having back then. So. Yeah,
it never comes up. Really. And you had mentioned there's no mention of, there's not a lot of homophobia other than, like, a couple of dumb jokes. There's also no, like, well, you're gonna die of AIDS, like, what's wrong with you? There's no mention of AIDS in either of these movies, which in the early to mid 90s, it was still a very real,
huge
threat.
Very real.
So that's I would say to the film's credit, because it doesn't have to be a part of every queer story.
Exactly. And I think, like, you know, that is one of the good things that came from, like, this kind of slew of, like, mainstream queer movies in the 90s, was that, like, queer people are more than AIDS. Like, you know, they have these whole, you know, queer people also, like, have these whole, like, rich lives that sometimes involve, like, raising children, like in the Birdcage, and, you know, just, or even in George's case, like, queer people are also just, like, teachers and, you know, people who, and that, I think that's a really good thing that came out.
I think that we made a lot of progress in the 90s, and I do think that George W. Bush and their weaponizing of religion against those very families, against gay marriage, and against that, I think that set us back quite a while. But you can see it in the early 90s. The last episode we talked about this, and in this one, they're slowly, not great in terms of, like, representation, and you know, not necessarily what anybody would look to like an ideal queer movie, but at the same time, it normalizes us
hugely.
And when it normalizes us when we're played by Robin Williams, who was at the time one of the biggest comedic actors.
Oh yeah, and just super loved by everyone. Like, so the fact that, like, he's playing this gay man who just sort of, who's not flamboyant really, like, who just kind of wants to live his life with his partner and their adult child, and, like, isn't great with, like, having to play straight, but will do it because he loves his son so much. Like, I think that went a very long way. Like, it's just like, oh, like, normal things. Like, sometimes my partner annoys me, but I love him, and like, I have the son who I would do anything for. Like, and
absolutely.
And, you know, just progress, not perfection. I think like there are things we couldn't get away with in mainstream Hollywood in the 90s. So like, even if certain things don't hold up, it's like, you know, at the time, like, I mean, just the fact that, like, we were, like, high school kids in a very small town, like, seeing movies with queer characters just living their lives, like, that's very big deal.
And like I said, at the time too, I feel like concurrently they were, you started to see more, like, queer relatives. There was there was no, like, there's no regular character, but every main character of, like, sitcoms, like, had, like, a gay brother or a gay neighbor who would show up for, like, a special episode or whatever it was. Again, slowly just kind of normalizing us, even if it's backwards representation. Again, we've talked about this before, where it's like, we can't get to positive. We can't get to positive representation without representation. So just make it happen. So, and I do think that we went. I do think that George W. Bush set us back quite a bit.
Oh, without a doubt. But like, it's just also, we were talking about this in the holiday episode, where it's just, you know, also just, you know, sometimes it's quantity over quality too. Like even now, it's just like I want all the LGBTQ representation, and I want to be able to look at something and say like, that's not my thing. Probably not for me. Rather than like, you know, when we were younger, we were like, oh my God, like any gay character, even if it was a subconscious thing, it was just like, oh, I am drawn to heavenly creatures, which is still a very good movie. But yeah, like, yeah. So this is totally silly. And I did not remember this until I rewatched it. But the object of my affection, like, upped my pajama game, like 200%. Because up until I saw this movie as a 17-year-old, I wore like Fred Flintstone nightshirts and like probably ugly nightgowns. But then I saw Jennifer Aniston in her cute little drawstring bottoms and little tank tops and camisoles. And I was like, wow, she looks so cute. And so from then on, and even like what I was watching it in last night, I wear cute little camis and like drawstring shorts or pants to bed. And I understand, like, that is probably, like, not the most groundbreaking revelation I could have had. But I distinctly remember this movie being, like, her pajamas are so cute. Like, I want to look. And I never was, like, the biggest, like, Jennifer Aniston fan or whatever. I'm fine with her. Like, she's Jennifer Aniston. But, yeah, I was just like, those pajamas are great. I want to look like that. And so I still wear, like, my little drawstrings and my little camis. And it started with this movie. Like,
wow.
Right? And
that's funny because my crush on Paul Rudd started with this movie.
I can imagine that. Like, how could you not crush on him? Like, especially like the age we were, like, and him playing a gay man, like, he's fucking adorable. And just.
Yeah, that's the other thing about this role and him taking on this role that's notable is it's at a time, and and I would say would even be notable too for Kevin Kline and Robin Williams, but for a straight actress to take on a gay role, but especially way more so for Paul Rudd, because Paul Rudd was not the name. Robin Williams and Kevin Kline, when they were making their films, were established and Oscar nominated and whatever. Oh, right. But Paul Rudd was taking a huge risk. Huge. Yeah. And it like, in retrospect, I don't think I thought of this at the time, but in retrospect, it makes me like him more. He's like, I'm Paul Rudd, bitch. Like, he's like, I'm just gonna be in this movie with Jennifer Aniston. And speaking of Jennifer Aniston, I have a cat named Phoebe, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she is my second favorite friend. Got it. Phoebe is also my favorite. She's the best. I would say, like, it's, for me, and I was never, like, Friends is something, like, I watch in my hotel rooms when I'm traveling alone, which obviously I haven't done for a while, but it's always on and it's always funny. I wasn't super into it at the time, probably because, and Rob Cameron will laugh at this, probably because it was very mainstream and I was a little shitbag hipster, but that said, I would say Phoebe then, like, Chandler for me. Like, I don't think Rachel is up there for me. But, you know, Aniston has a lot of charm. Like, there's a reason she's Jennifer Aniston. So. Yeah. She's very funny. She's very funny. She's so charming. And this, like, this is a charming movie to me. Yeah. And I like her fine in this movie. My issues with the movie have way more to do with just sort of pacing and things like that. She's fine in it. I don't think she's like it. She doesn't really seem like a Nina, and I don't remember her last name, but it was a very Jewish sounding last name, and I was like, yeah. I mean, that's another thing. Like, Wendy Wasserstein is very Jewish, obviously, and that was another thing where, like, you do kind of wonder, like, what this movie originally looked like. Yeah. Like, before it was Jennifer Aniston. Yeah, I don't think it was written for her. No, it doesn't seem like it was. Well, the Internet Movie Database had other cast, other people that had been in mind for it. Robert Downey Jr. was one of them. Winona Ryder turned down the role of Nina. Sarah Jessica Parker and Robert Downey Jr. were initially cast. Stephen Baldwin was replaced by John Pankow after one day of work. So As much as I'm completely indifferent to the guy from Mad About You, but wow, a step up from Stephen Baldwin.
No shit.
And also it says Uma Thurman and Keanu Reeves were in the lead roles.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, this was the other thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if you noticed this. The singer at the
Audra
wedding
McDonald!
is Audra McDonald.
I screamed at the wedding scene because there is no way I knew who Audra McDonald was when I first watched this movie.
Right.
And now I have seen her on Broadway and like...
Nice.
But Audra McDonald is everything. She also makes this movie like 200% gayer, and I approve of that.
According to the trivia, Nicholas Hentner had directed her in Carousel in 1994 and did it. I don't know
about that.
So probably just did it like as a favor. Like,
oh, I'm sure. You know, maybe that's also where I'd heard his name because I owned that recording of Carousel.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was staged more like an opera, which, God, we could do a whole fucking podcast about Carousel because talk about problematic, but it's so beautiful. And they staged it as like more of like an opera. They had more like opera singers. And I think like that's McDonald's like initial background is opera. Mm-hmm. And she's so good in it. And I love that like she did this. Like, because yeah, it was a total favor. And oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. But did you had any final thoughts on it, or should you want to move on to Say Something Gay?
I think let's move on to Say Something Gay.
My Say Something Gay is Paul Rudd shirtless.
What is my Say Something Gay? I guess I Say a Little Prayer for You sing along is
that's
very,
a really cute moment. Yeah,
gay in my best friend's wedding, and it's just the best moment. And yeah, like you said, Rachel Griffiths, who we love, is a vengeful slut. And
I want to talk real quick about Rachel Griffiths trying to go down on the ice sculpture of David. Well, thank you so much for hopping on and talking about these two movies. Like I said, I've been wanting to do this pairing for a while, so I was glad someone finally jumped on it.
Oh, hell yeah. Like, this was my pairing, man.
Do you want to hit us with your social media?
Absolutely. So I am Lauren Emily Wrights on Facebook and Instagram. On Twitter, I am Lauren Emily Rye, W-R-I. I have my second YA novel is now up for pre-order. It is called Two Winters, and it is a queer young adult reimagining of Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. And the funny thing is my best friend's wedding came out in 1997, which is when the first half of Two Winters is set, 1997. Oh. And it's all very gay. And yeah, it's up for pre-order, Amazon, IndieBound, wherever you buy books.
Excellent. You can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I myself am So Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, R-O-W-E, on Instagram and Twitter. Drop us a like, drop us a follow. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention is I took an unofficial poll about these two movies, and our Instagram followers have deemed My Best Friend's Wedding the superior movie. So give us a follow so you can vote on future pairings and all of that good stuff. Bye. We'll see you back here next time. Thanks again, Lauren. This was great. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.